Hello class, this is John Marcinizin here, and we are looking at the lecture for Wednesday, April 22nd. Today we will be focusing on nationalism in music. We talked about that before. I mentioned it in the introduction to contemporary music. Just so there is no confusion, under Wednesday, April 22nd there, you see on the syllabus, Arnold Schoenberg. Remember, we covered that last class. On Monday, April 20th, we looked at and listened to Igor Stravinsky, The Rite of Spring, an example of primitivism, and Arnold Schoenberg, an example of expressionism, better known as atonal or 12-tone music without a tone center. If you recall, both of those styles were not very dissonant, right? More harsh, abstract on the ears. So Stravinsky with primitivism, you have more than one scale or key being used at the same time. So there's not one main tone center, but rather two or more tone centers battling for attention. That creates dissonance. With Schoenberg, in atonal music, atonal, sometimes pronounced atonal, like a cappella, which means without instruments. Atonal means without a tone center. All tones are equal, so there's no tone center. Very controversial music. So both of those styles being more abstract. Schoenberg being the most abstract, Stravinsky still dissonant. Before that, we listened to Claude Debussy, which uses whole tone scales, which are, less dissonant, we might say, than Stravinsky. Keep in mind, all these styles are coexisting, including what we're about to talk about today, nationalism. So, this style, in terms of dissonance, is not dissonant at all, right? This is more consonant. There's a clear tonality with nationalism based on major and minor scales, as you will find. So far less dissonant than what we heard. So nationalism, again, referring to music, is when a composer incorporates folk songs, dances, legends, and other material associated with the composer's homeland. This happens in all countries. I gave some examples of Spanish nationalism, right? Played some things on the guitar for you before. Today we're focusing on specifically American nationalism, which is nice since we haven't listened to any music of the United States. And the United States really doesn't have an individual voice until the 20th century. If you think about it, right, we're a relatively new country. So if we declared independence in 1776, for 100 years or more, certainly through the 19th century, the 1800s, the style here would have been European style, right? We were coming from other countries and bringing that culture. And it wasn't until we had people being born in this country that we started to cultivate our own country, or our own musical style, our own musical voice. And that's certainly heard in the folk music. That's where we get it first of all. So we will be listening to two different composers that come from different backgrounds. So we're going to start with Aaron Copland. His dates are 1900 to 1990. Okay? Getting close to the present, but not quite there yet. And Aaron Copland was a composer. He wrote in a lot of different styles throughout his life. He experimented with ideas that Stravinsky was using, more abstract styles. He went to Paris to study composition. There was a famous composition teacher that many people flocked to study with her. Her name was Nadia Boulanger. Okay, not that you have to remember that name. I'd just like to mention her because she was very influential to a lot of composers. And what her gift was is that, Boulanger, in case you decide to look it up, Boulanger, Nadia Boulanger. So Copland studied with her, Stravinsky, I didn't mention him earlier studying with her, but many great composers studied with her. Now, so why would they study with her? They didn't need to know the rules about how to write music and how to harmonize things. I mean, they already knew that. Her gift was bringing out what was unique about an individual. And what she did with Copland was she encouraged him to write, of all the different things that she heard him doing, music that was nationalistic, if you will. He was writing music that would incorporate folk songs and in some cases write things in the style of American folk music that that were completely his own, but they sounded like folk songs. So that's what he devoted a large part of his life to doing, was just that. And one of his most popular pieces is called Appalachian Spring. It's a ballet. Okay, so we listened to and watched a ballet. Igor Stravinsky talked about its controversy in terms of the music and even the dance and the riot. This is not controversial at all. This piece was written in 1945, Appalachian Spring. It was choreographed by Martha Graham. She was the person that composed the dancing that went to it. And it's interesting to note that Martha Graham is from Pittsburgh. So she was born and raised on the north side. And the ballet is about a pioneer celebrating in spring around a newly built farmhouse in the Pennsylvania hills around the early part of the 1800s. So it has a very folksy quality to it. In Copland, because of the music that he was influenced by, he writes a lot of, as I've already mentioned, music that sounds like American folk music. But he also uses a very popular folk tune, and there it is. He uses a Shaker tune. So the Shakers were an extremist religious sect in the late part of the 1800s, early 1900s. And they, similar to the Amish, we might say, lived away from general society in their own culture, but they did produce some beautiful folk music as well as woodwork and furniture they were known for as well. And certainly this melody was already popular before Copland used it, but became even more popular. And I bet when I play this for you, I bet you're going to recognize the melody. Simple Gifts. So I'm going to do this first. I'm going to play just a little bit of Copland's, not the whole piece. Let's see if oh good, no commercial. Okay, so that is the folk melody, Simple Gifts. Etc. What you just heard. Copland takes that melody, and we're going to hear that in just a moment. And he puts it in theme and variation form. So look at that. He's even using old forms. And we know what a theme and variation is. So notice how simple and tonal that was compared to what we just heard with our last two composers, with Stravinsky and Schoenberg. He harmonizes that. He orchestrates it. He puts it in theme and variation. So he makes it his own. He plays with it. And the music that comes before and later in this ballet is his own, but he writes music that's in the style. So now here is the melody. Now there are many versions of this. This is a version that was recorded in the late 60s, early 70s by Judy Collins.
Think you know FanDuel?
Let's get through the commercial here.
That we've got an ace up our sleeve.
Some of you may or may not be familiar with Judy Collins, a wonderful pop rock folk singer. And here is her version of Simple Gifts with the words which are simple to follow. It's the gift to be simple, the gift to be free. Just talking about the beauty and the gifts of simplicity. The melody is simple, the message is simple, being grateful for what you have. First the melody. Here it is, we're hearing it again.
Tis the gift to be simple, tis the gift to be free, tis the gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we are in the place just right, we'll be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we will not be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round.
Okay, there it is. All right, so there's Simple Gifts. All right, so Copland takes that melody and he makes that a big part of his ballet, Appalachian Spring. Okay? And then it becomes so popular that he later reorchestrates this piece to be an instrumental piece. And it is performed just as frequently, actually maybe more often, as a... here, let's look at this. Gives us, so we know what we're talking about. It is probably performed more often now as an instrumental piece without the dance, which we're about to see. So what he did is he reorchestrated it for a fuller orchestra. It was actually originally written for just 13 instruments with dance, and he reorchestrated it for full orchestra. And then he cut out some of the music that he felt didn't work without the dance, made it a stronger instrumental piece. So we're going to hear that second, that part of what we call an orchestral suite, when he takes the music from the ballet, reorchestrates it, cuts out some of the parts that don't work without the dance, and he calls it a suite, S-U-I-T-E. just meaning multi-movement composition, generic word for a multi-movement composition. So let's first look at and listen to the ballet, an excerpt from the ballet. Here we are. Oh, we want to start from the beginning, of course. Okay, so I'll point out some things as we go along. Okay, so not being a dancer myself, but remember how abstract the Stravinsky dancing was. Now, this being, this ballet, I would say, blends what we might consider to be more traditional ballet dancing, more elegant, sophisticated dancing. But since we're incorporating folk songs, you'll notice every so often there will be some folksy moves by the dancer. So blending, if you will, folk dancing with classical dancing, just as the music is doing the same. We might, lump this into the broad category of classical music, but it's based on a folk song. Right? There's our melody. Hopefully you recognize that by now. So notice the dancing. This might look a little bit more ballet-like at this moment, right? Maybe a little folksy there. More folksy there. Okay, more ballet-like here. Right? Maybe a little more folksy, a little more ballet. Definitely more folksy there. You get the idea. Blending the two styles of dance, just as we're blending folk music with classical music. And we're hearing the same melody over and over again, but with variations, right? Theme and variation. Another variation. Same melody, right? Theme and variation. We're familiar with this from classical music, from Haydn. Okay, so that's the end of this section of the ballet that uses simple gifts. Now we're not going to listen to the rest of this, but this is all Copland's music now, and then anything that resembles American folk music that follows is Copland's. So this goes on for a while. Let's just gets a bit more dramatic here. Okay, but we're not gonna let's just focus on the folk song. So now I'd like to play a little bit of this arrangement for you. Okay? So this is the same piece we just heard, but it's going to be for full orchestra. And some of the sections in between the variations are scaled down a bit. He edits the music just a little bit because there's no dance involved. Right, main melody. The theme, Simple Gifts. Okay, little interlude connecting, very short theme, variation. Hear it in the low strings. Da, da, da. Now imitation, right? Ba, ba, ba. We hear that opening phrase of that melody being imitated, right? Just like Baroque music, just like the fugue form. Okay, speed up. Okay. And finally, the last presentation, big, majestic. Okay, there you have it. Okay, Aaron Copland, one example of nationalism, okay, more specifically American nationalism. He takes the Shaker tune as the basis for that section of the ballet and later the suite, writes a theme and variation on it. All the music surrounding it that we didn't hear in this approximately total 1 hour of music might have some other folk tunes or plenty of original music written by Copland in this folksy style. Now, our other composer that is an example of a nationalism, also American nationalism, is William Grant Still. 1895 to 1978 are his dates. So William Grant Still is African American, so he's drawing on different influences of American nationalism that are unique to his culture. So he's drawing on American spirituals and other styles of music that are uniquely African American, like the blues, like jazz. He even features the banjo, which was an instrument based on an African instrument. and we hear it in folk songs that were written during the days of slavery on the plantation. And that instrument also becomes an important part of Dixieland jazz music, New Orleans jazz music, which is very much created by African Americans, jazz music, Dixieland jazz, the blues, and using the banjo in that style of music. So let's take a look. Well, there's Aaron Copland. I didn't pull this up when we were talking about him, but you certainly have this to look at. So let's look at William Grant Still. There he is. Often referred to as the Dean of Afro-American Composers. Still was the first American composer. He was the first of many, look at this, to have an opera produced by the New York City Opera. His first symphony, the Afro-American Symphony, was premiered by a professional orchestra. So he was one of the first African Americans to have that accomplishment. And that's what we will be listening to today. One movement from that. So William Grant Still was part of a movement that was known as the Harlem Renaissance. So this is something that took place in the 1920s in Harlem in Upper Manhattan, New York City. It emerged as a kind of a cultural capital of African American arts, including literature, painting, and music. So there are many other artists associated with this. Some of the writers, Zora Neale Hurston, Wallace Thurman, Langston Hughes was a poet, and William Grant Still even set some of his some of his poetry to music, right? Remember when we listened to Pierrot Lunaire? Well, there is a poem by Langston Hughes called Black Pierrot, and William Grant Still sets that to music, right? The same character, but with slightly different overtones. Who else? Duke Ellington, the great jazz musician. He's part of this movement. So these are artists celebrating African American culture, the rich culture that it is. So when we listen to this piece by Langston Hughes, he uses, as I already mentioned, he draws on blues music, spirituals, but in the case of this specific piece, he is writing his own tunes based on these sounds. So they're not pre-existing folk songs like Copland used. That's not to say he didn't use that, but in this example, he's not using that. He's just writing. He's evoking that style, that flavor. So that, along with the use of the banjo, is what he's doing. So okay, so that's the first tune that we're going to hear. It's often referred to as the Hallelujah tune. Let's see, here it is. We're going to listen to the third movement. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Okay, so there aren't any words, but it's often thought of that he calls this the Hallelujah tune because you could just sing that. Hallelujah. Now, excuse me, he also does other things. He incorporates what are known as blue tones, blue notes, notes that are in between the scale. So this part of the piece is very major, as we will hear. Then he moves to, he moves to a more minor sound, and he throws in this note, which isn't in the scale. I'm just improvising now to make it sound, more bluesy. Okay, so that's how he's evoking that sound of American nationalism, more specifically African American sounds, folk sounds that he's familiar with. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to say about the banjo, right? So I'm going to play a little bit of banjo music prior to us hearing this. So now, not to be too presumptuous here, but my guess is that a lot of times when we think of the banjo, we might think of more bluegrass banjo playing that would sound something like this, really fast finger picking.
When I first saw this product, I thought it looked kind of crazy.
Not this guy.
Didn't really understand what the benefits would be, but...
Okay, I'm going to... Okay. Right? Fast picking. Right? This is what has become the popular banjo folk sound. Okay? Prior to that, it was more, in the folk style, it was more strummed than it was plucked. And certainly in Dixieland jazz, it would also be very much part of the African American culture initially. Okay, so notice this guy playing the banjo. He's doing more of a strumming style. Right? More of an accompaniment. Still very sophisticated, right? It's not easy to do what he's doing. But notice he's just strumming. Yeah. Okay, so that's more of the style in which Langston Hughes, I'm sorry, not Langston Hughes, that's the writer, the contemporary writer of William Grant Still. That's more of the style that he is using, more of that strumming style. So we're going to listen to it so in this format first so that we could see the banjo player. You could see him sitting there on the far right. So the banjo is certainly not part of a standard orchestra. Then I'll play a little bit more of the piece in a more a better quality recording. But something else I wanted to say about Langston, I keep saying Langston Hughes, okay, he was the writer, William Grant Still. Something else I want to say about William Grant Still, the composer that we're looking at, listening to. So I already mentioned he was a first. He had these extraordinary talents as a composer, but he was also a very all-around gifted musician. So if you recall, I mentioned of all these 20th century composers, the two most successful composers that made a living pretty much exclusively by composing were Igor Stravinsky and the other person we listened to today, Aaron Copland. Most musicians of the 20th century, including most musicians that I know, you have to do a lot of different things. And that means, if you want to be a full-time musician, you have to teach, you have to be able to play a lot of different styles, be able to adapt to different things. So in addition to being a great composer, William Grant Still was also an instrumentalist. He did gigs, right? He played piano, so he played in clubs. He also had what we call a fast hand. So a lot of times when music for the theater, let's say, putting on a production, whether he wrote the music or not, a lot of times and I know this as being an instrumentalist, a lot of times when you're playing the music in a musical theater production, you can't always hire all the musicians that the music is written for. The main reason is usually the budget. There's not enough money for that. So sometimes you have to reduce the score, have fewer musicians, but you don't want to weaken the quality of the music. So that means you have to orchestrate it in a very skillful way that the music still sounds good, it still sounds powerful with fewer instruments. So you need to be able to, you have to be good to do that, have a great ear, but you also have to do it quickly because things move fast in the theater. Sometimes you're hired to do something like that. You have a couple rehearsals and then you're up and running. You're in production. So William Grant Still was someone that could arrange music like that very quickly. He had a fast hand. So he made a good living because he was multi-talented as a musician on many different levels. So now, back to his piece that we're our focus of today. His the third movement from his first symphony, also known as the Afro-American Symphony.
Now I have to say, this is the first time that I've ever played in an orchestra or conducted an orchestra where I got to use a banjo. And this next movement is going to feature the use of the banjo. It's called Humor. And this was a poem that Dunbar wrote about emancipation and the citizenship of blacks in America. And we'll shout out hallelujahs on that mighty reckoning day.
Okay. It's gearing us up for the first theme, the Hallelujah theme. Da-da-da-da, that's the Hallelujah thing. Da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Look at the banjo and hear the banjo on the right. It's just working as an accompaniment. It's not really, it says it's featured because it's unique that it's there, but it's really just an accompaniment. Even the second part of this theme has a little bit of that blue note sound. So this would be more of the spiritual influence, if you will. Now it gets a little more bluesy coming up. The use of the scale and the chromatic blue notes in between. Pentatonic minor. Okay, I'm going to pause it there because I'm going to play this in its entirety with just a better quality recording. And there he is. There's our composer right there. William Grant Still. Chuck, 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 chuck. That's the banjo accompaniment. Hallelujah theme. Second part of it. Da, 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 hallelujah. Da, 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 da. The more bluesy theme, if you will. So we have two main themes here. And just like any good composer, what do you do with your themes, with your melodies? You develop them, you break them down, you manipulate them in a much freer way than, let's say, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven did, but nevertheless, that idea. Right? We'll hear the Hallelujah fragment being broken down. Hallelujah thing. Right? Bringing the main idea back. Right? An ABA, kind of a quasi-sonata form. We have the themes up front, development in the middle, and then we bring them back at the end. There's the second theme, the more bluesy one. Okay, there it is. All right. William Grant Still. Okay, Symphony Number 1, Afro-American, the third movement we just listened to. Style is American nationalism. With Still, he's inspired by American spirituals and the blues. Features a banjo in the orchestra. All the things we pointed out. Okay, so that's it for today. Now, this study guide is also posted on Blackboard under course content, as is this video. And as always, this video is posted on YouTube as well. I give you the link for that. I sometimes find it easier to access it off of YouTube, so whatever works for you. But next class, we just have one more piece to do. And as you can see, not a whole lot to say about it either. Steve Reich, Electric Counterpoint is the piece. The style of it is minimalism. And then we'll have a review. And the review will be on these composers, these pieces, right? So we'll go over this, but I already talked about it, and here it is written for you. What is the third exam? The third and final music exam will be questions dealing with composers and compositions of the Romantic and 20th century periods. There they are, right there. 10 pieces listed up front. They will be in the form of, just like the first two exams, true or false, fill in the blank, multiple choice, and short answer. Good way to organize your material is to focus on the few things we discussed about each composer and each composition. And there it is. I lay it out for you there. So as you're doing your listening, as you're doing your reading, these are the main things that you want to remember and focus on concerning each composer. Okay? And as I said before, more things about some composers than others. There was just more to talk about. Look at that, Stravinsky and Schoenberg especially, right? The two more abstract composers, it seems only natural. There's a little bit more to say about them and to explain the music. So that's what we did. Okay, so see you Friday for the last lecture on Steve Reich and the review. As always, contact me with any questions that you might have, and stay healthy and safe. See you Friday. Remember, the exam is Monday, April 27. Make sure you're at your computer. 12 p.m. if you're in section 1 p.m. if you're in section 2. The exam will be emailed to you, and you have 50 minutes to complete. So, see you next class.